Hey, this is Richie. This is Richie's Reviews from the Fan of Football 813 YouTube channel. I'm going to be doing an in-depth review from this previous weekend's games. I'm mostly going to be doing stats, just straight stats. I might tell some stories if I have any, but this is breaking things down my stats. I wanted to give credit not just to the top 25 teams and top 25 players that most people know of. I'm going to break down every single game and tell stats from every player that I feel like are worthy of being shouted out. So this first video will be the Thursday and Friday games combined, and then I'll do a separate video for Saturday. That's just for this weekend since there's so many games for this opening weekend. In the future, I'm just going to be doing one video and try to go straight through. The first game from Thursday was the UCF Knights against UConn Huskies. UCF went undefeated last year. They have one of the best quarterbacks in the country coming in. They have a new coach who is the offensive coordinator from Missouri. He's come in to make that UC fast offense even faster. Mackenzie Milton, fringe Heisman candidate. His stats, he went 24 of 32 for 346 yards, 5 touchdown passes to 0 interceptions, and ran for 50 yards as well. And the top receiver for UCF was Trey Nixon. He had 5 receptions for 101 yards and 2 touchdowns. They pretty much steamrolled over UConn. However, UConn's quarterback had a phenomenal game, David Pindle. He went 27 of 41 for 266 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick, and ran for 157 yards and a touchdown. And they had a receiver, Kyle Buss, had 7 receptions for 113 yards. So he gave the UCF defense a lot of problems. However, he was pretty much the only thing that gave them problems. So UCF won that game 56-17. The next game was the New Mexico State Aggies against the Minnesota Golden Gophers, and the Gophers won that game 48-10. Minnesota started a quarterback, a true freshman quarterback, if I remember correctly. So his name is Zach Anakstad. Anakstad is just the second time in major college football history that a true freshman walk-on quarterback started a season opener. And I did just read that straight off, and the only other person to do that before him was Baker Mayfield, who was just the #1 overall pick in this past year's draft. So an interesting and good feat for him. He had an okay first game, 16 of 33, 220 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 picks, less than 50% completion, but was solid. It was mostly Minnesota's running game. They had 2 running backs over 100 yards rushing. Rodney Smith, 24 carries, 153 yards, and Muhammad Ibrahim, 9 carries for 101 yards. Rodney Smith is one of the better running backs in the Big Ten. 2 years ago, he ran for 1,158 yards and 16 touchdowns, and then last year, he ran for 977 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he's basically a 1,000-yard rusher for them. Tyler Johnson, one of the receivers for Minnesota, had 5 receptions for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. And New Mexico State, they didn't have a whole lot. They have a new quarterback, Matt Romero, 29 of 58, 233, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. They were in the game very early, and then Minnesota just bowled them over on their way to that large win. So the next game from Thursday was the Ball State Cardinals, and they beat a 1AA team, Central Connecticut. They beat them 42-6. Ball State's interesting because last year their starting quarterback and their starting running back were both out for the year within the first 3 games, so they kind of didn't even have a chance to start. They're both back, as well as the backup running back for Ball State, who filled in and ran for 1,000 yards himself last year. So they came into the season with a 1,000-yard running back from last year named Caleb Huntley, and James Gilbert, who was the injured one, ran for 1,000 yards 2 seasons ago. So in this game, the quarterback, Riley Neal, solid game, 23 of 30, 259, 2 touchdowns. James Gilbert came back strong, 14 carries, 100 yards, and a touchdown. And they made quick work of Central Connecticut as well. The Georgia State Panthers played 1AA Kennesaw State Owls. This was a close one. Kennesaw State had a lead until very late. Georgia State scored with under a minute left to win 24-20. Georgia State, their quarterback, Dan Ellington, he was solid, 20-28, 187 yards, but 3 touchdown passes, and more importantly, no interceptions, which is what allowed them to win. Georgia State, they escaped with one. Southeastern Louisiana played the UL Monroe Warhawks. This was a very close game. UL Monroe scored late as well. They won 34-31. Caleb Evans, though, the quarterback for ULM, he had a very productive game. He was 35 of 53, 346 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick, and ran for 62 yards and a touchdown as well. Their top running back, Derek Gore, had 21 carries for 104 yards and a touchdown. And if Derek Gore sounds familiar to anybody, he used to be at Alabama and transferred to ULM. Marcus Green, 7 receptions, 99 yards, 2 touchdowns. RJ Turner, 7 receptions, 95 yards, 2 touchdowns, both receivers for ULM. I'll shout out to the Southeastern Louisiana team. Chasen Virgil, who actually was a transfer from Fresno State, he went 28-39, 358, 4 touchdowns, and the receiver Juwan Petit Frere had 5 receptions for 148 yards and 2 touchdowns as well. Alright, the next game was one of the more interesting games for the opening weekend. It was a conference game, a Big Ten conference game between the Northwestern Wildcats and the Purdue Boilermakers. Northwestern came in, their quarterback had gotten hurt at the end of last season, Clayton Thorson, and they lost their running back Justin Jackson, who was a 4-year starter, ran for 1,000 yards over 4 years, finished as the number 10 rusher of all time in NCAA history. He was being replaced by Jeremy Larkin. The Wildcats won 31-27 in a close game. Clayton Thorson, he had a solid game. He came in, he was 16-26, 172, but Jeremy Larkin pretty much stole the show. He had 26 carries for 143 yards and 2 touchdowns. And for Purdue, unfortunately, their starter, Elijah Sindelar, he had 3 interceptions, which wasn't good. They did have a receiver, Rania Moore. He had 11 receptions for 109 yards and a touchdown. And he had 2 carries for 79 yards and a touchdown, and one of them being a 76-yard touchdown run. So he was kind of an all-around, all-purpose kind of threat. The next game for Thursday, the Wake Forest Demon Deacons played the Tulane Green Wave, and Wake Forest won 23-17. That game did actually go in overtime. It was a good game back and forth. Wake Forest, they had a freshman quarterback starting in Sam Hartman. He was pretty much on fire. He was 31-51 for 378 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. He did throw a pick, an interception late in the game that almost cost them, but they escaped with it. They had 2 receivers over 100 yards, and they put up amazing numbers. Sage Surratt had 11 catches for 150 yards, and Greg Dortch had 12 receptions for 149 yards. For Tulane, they're more of a triple option team, but they did pass quite a bit. Jonathan Banks, 18-37, which is not very good percentage-wise, but 281 yards, 2 touchdowns. They had a receiver, Taron Oncolad, 8 receptions, 189 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So they were able to move it pretty decently. They just couldn't quite stop Wake Forest. The next game for Thursday, Savannah State took on the UAB Blazers. UAB, I mentioned this story before, but in 2014, they went 6-6. They shut down the football program due to money and other issues. So they did not even play in 15 and 16. They come back last year, 2017, after basically having nobody on their roster. They come back, they won 8 games last year, made a bowl. Phenomenal story, phenomenal job. They come out here, win 52-0. AJ Erdley, the quarterback for UAB, 22-28, 228 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Spencer Brown, the running back, 18 carries, 102 yards and a touchdown. Their top receiver, Colin Lisa, 10 receptions, 93 yards and a touchdown. And Colin Lisa, He's one of their good ones. He was actually there on their roster in 2014. He played a little bit. He decided to stay there. He came back last year with them, and he's back this year with them. So Conley's is balling out and showing that loyalty to UAB. Spencer Brown, he's the running back for UAB. I'll give him a shout out because last year as a freshman, he had 250 carries for 1,329 yards and 10 touchdowns. So he's one of the best running backs in maybe the group of 5. Missouri State took on the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Oklahoma State, one of the best teams in the Big 12. They manhandled them. They won 58-17. Some nice stats though. First game for Taylor Cornelius, a senior starter for Oklahoma State. It's his first start. He went 24 of 34, 295 yards, 5 touchdown passes, and only 1 pick. Oklahoma State had 2 running backs rush for over 100 yards. One was Justice Hill, who had 10 carries for 122 yards and a touchdown. L.D. Brown also had 10 carries, 115 yards, and 1 touchdown. Justice Hill, he's one of the best running backs in all of America. Last season, he had 268 carries for 1,467 yards and 15 touchdowns. So he's a definite All-American candidate. Maybe Friends Heisman candidate. Depends on how they do overall as a team and how he does as well. I'll just throw out Missouri State. Their running back Peyton Hustling had 18 carries and 109 yards. Alright, so the next game from Thursday, Weber State or Weber State, whichever. They played Utah. Utah struggled a little early on, but Utah ended up winning 41-10. Their quarterback Tyler Huntley ended up with a good game, 24 of 39, 250 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a pick. Zach Moss, their running back for Utah, he took it over, 16 carries, 150 yards, and a touchdown. Zach Moss is one of the better running backs in the Pac-12. Last season, he ran for 1,173 yards and 10 touchdowns. Northwestern State played the Texas A&M Aggies. A&M, their first game under Jimbo Fisher, they looked really, really good. They won 59-7. Yes, it's against a 1AA team, but they still looked really good, really strong. Their quarterback, Kellen Mond, was their starter. He was 17-25, 184, 2 touchdowns. Okay game. But really, it was their running back, Travion Williams. He played basically only the first half and ran for 240 yards and 3 touchdowns. And he'll have more games to prove himself this weekend coming up. A&M plays Clemson. If he goes off again, you got to put him in that Heisman. But right now, it was just a good first game. Northwestern State, Jazz Ferguson, 4 catches, 129 yards, and a touchdown. The final game from Thursday night was UC Davis, 1AA UC Davis playing at San Jose State Spartans. And UC Davis took that one. It was a bit of an upset, although San Jose State kind of sucks. UC Davis, they won 44-38. The quarterback for UC Davis, Jake Meyer, 37 of 55, 446, 3 touchdowns and a pick. Alonzo Gilliam, their running back, 23 carries, 132, 2 touchdowns. For San Jose State, they didn't have a whole lot. Their quarterback, Montel Aaron, 13 of 19, 254, 2 touchdowns, 0 picks. Not bad. Their receiver, Bailey Gaither, had 6 receptions, 137 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But San Jose, good luck trying to win the rest of the year. So now we're going to go into the Friday games. The first game from Friday, Western Kentucky Hilltoppers at Wisconsin Badgers. Wisconsin, they had a pretty easy time with this game. They won 34-3. Their quarterback, Alex Hornibrook, was 17-29, 257 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 picks. He was solid, but mostly their story was their running back, Jonathan Taylor, who is a high Heisman candidate. He had 18 carries, 145 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So they made quick work of them, and watch out for Jonathan Taylor. Last year he ran for 1,977 yards as a true freshman, so that's pretty great. Western Kentucky didn't have a whole lot. So one of the games of the weekend, one of the near upsets, Utah State Aggies went into Michigan State. the Michigan State Spartans and nearly beat them. Utah State scored with about 3 minutes left to go up 31-30. Michigan State then goes back and scores with 2 minutes left, under 2 minutes or so. And Michigan State ekes out this win 38-31. Michigan State, their quarterback, Brian Lewerke, 23 of 33, 287 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Their running game, he had a solid game. They didn't have much. They kind of struggled, especially on defense. Utah State went up and down on them. The quarterback for Utah State, Jordan Love, 29 of 44, 319 yards. He did throw 2 interceptions, but they went up and down the field. They put up 31 points on what's supposed to be one of the best defense in the country, or what usually is. They couldn't stop that Utah State offense. Michigan State better be ready next week. They got Arizona State, who's got a solid offense and a good quarterback. San Diego State, Aztecs, they took on the Stanford Cardinal. San Diego State last year beat Stanford. This first half, they held their own. They were only down 9-7 at halftime. And the Stanford ended up winning 31-10. But Stanford, their running back, Bryce Love, who was a Heisman candidate last year and this year, he finished second overall Heisman last year. San Diego State's defense shut him down. He only had 18 carries for 29 yards. Stanford actually made up for it. Their quarterback and their wide receiver. Their quarterback, KJ Costello, 21 of 31, 332 yards, 4 touchdowns and a pick. He had a great game. He had some misfires, but overall, great game. Now the wide receiver, keep an eye out for him. He might have taken over that Heisman spot from Bryce Love. JJ Arcega-Whiteside. 6 receptions, 226 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He was the main reason they were able to win that game. For San Diego State, I called out the running back for San Diego State, Juwan Washington. Last season, he was the second string running back behind Rashad Penny, who ran for 2,200 yards, for 2,248 yards, I should say. And I pointed out in my picks last weekend for this game, watch out for Juwan Washington. He had 24 carries for 158 yards and a touchdown. So he did all he could to help them when San Diego State just couldn't get it done otherwise. But watch out for Juwan Washington for the rest of this season. The Syracuse Orange, they took on the Western Michigan Broncos. A bit of a shootout. Syracuse won 55-42. Syracuse was actually up pretty big and then let Western Michigan come out. Put it this way. Syracuse was up 34-7 at halftime, and Western Michigan scored 28 points in the third quarter alone. Syracuse, their quarterback, Eric Dungy, 7 of 17, 184 yards, 2 touchdowns, and picks. That's terrible percentage-wise, but he hit big plays, and he actually set an ACC record with 200 rushing yards, which is an ACC record yard by a quarterback. Most rushing yards by a quarterback. 200 rushing yards and a touchdown. The Syracuse running game ran for 334 yards. The Syracuse receiver, their top receiver was Jamal Custis, 6 receptions, 168 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So their offense should be pretty formidable this year. But it's that defense. Because Western Michigan, John Wasink, the quarterback for Western Michigan, 19 of 36, 379 yards, 3 touchdowns. But he did throw 2 interceptions. Levante Bellamy, the running back, or one of the running backs for Western Michigan, had 11 carries, 120 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And the Western Michigan wide receiver, Dwayne Eskridge. In fact, they had 2 receivers over 100 yards. Dwayne Eskridge had 8 receptions for 240 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Jaden Reed had 7 receptions for 121 yards and a touchdown. So Western Michigan looks like they might be a decent team in the MAC if they can get the offense rolling. The Monmouth against Eastern Michigan Eagles. Eastern Michigan, they won this one 51-17. They had a pretty good game. Their quarterback, Tyler Weigers, he's transferred from Iowa. He was 18 of 21, 238, 2 touchdowns. Their top receiver, Blake Banham, 8 receptions, 150 yards, and a touchdown. They pretty much did what they wanted in this game. But it's a good start for them A couple years ago, Eastern Michigan made a bowl. Last year, they just missed out again. Maybe with this offense, they can come back this year in the MAC and do something. I'll shout out for Monmouth, their running back, Jawan Ferry, 13 carries, 111 yards, and a touchdown. The next one, the Army Black Knights. They took on the Duke Blue Devils in a game I thought would be closer, but Duke pretty much shut down that Army triple option offense, and Duke won 34-14. Army normally averages well over 300 rushing yards a game and were held to 168 yards rushing. So they didn't do a whole lot. Duke, they had a solid game. Daniel Jones, he's one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC. 13 of 17, 197, and a touchdown. And ran for 43 yards and a touchdown. Aaron Young, wide receiver for Duke, had 4 receptions for 114 yards and a touchdown. They had a solid game. Their offense was okay. Their defense was really the story. Held that Army running game and that potent Army offense to well below their averages for what they wanted to do. The next game, Portland State 1AA took on Nevada, the Nevada Wolfpack. Nevada just steamrolled them. They put up 72. They won 72-19. Ty Ganji, 16 of 26, 342 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. They had 2 receivers go over 100. Caleb Fossum, 6 receptions, 139 yards. McLean Mannix, 4 receptions, 132 yards, and 3 touchdown receptions. So he had the hat trick. They ran for 216 yards. Their quarterback went off. They just could not be stopped. Shout out to Portland State. They had a receiver, Charlie Tamope, 3 receptions, 130 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Nevada, they had everything on their offense going. They had a pick 6. They had a punt return for a touchdown. So they had a really good opening game. When you drop 72, I don't care who it is, 1AA or not. That Mountain West better watch out for Nevada. So the final game from Friday was the in-state rivalry between the Colorado Buffaloes and the Colorado State Rams. Colorado took this from the beginning, and they had some stats to speak of. They won 45-13. Their quarterback, Steven Montez, 22 of 25, 338 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. Think about that. 22 of 25. That means he had 3 incompletions. He threw for 4 touchdowns. He had more touchdown passes than he had incompletions. That's a great game. Colorado rushing, Trayvon McMillan, who's a transfer from Virginia Tech. He had a good first game, 10 carries, 103 yards, and a touchdown. Their receiving core, they had 2 guys over 100 yards. Laviska Shenault, 11 receptions, 211 yards, and a touchdown. Katie Nixon, 6 receptions, 112 yards, and a touchdown. Watch out for Colorado. Maybe they can get something going and return to the Pac-12 championship game. Those are my reviews for the Thursday and Friday game. Watch out for my review for the Saturday games, and I'll also be doing a preview. And we're going to throw up our picks for the college, and we did an NFL pick. So watch out for those. Go to our YouTube channel, Fan of Football 813. My sister started a Twitter. Check us out. Thank you.